The room went quiet the second she said it. I was standing in my sister-in-law's dining room, holding a glass of Prosecco I hadn't touched, and 12 people were looking at me like they were waiting to see if I'd cry. Vanessa didn't lower her voice. She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear, then went back to her champagne like she'd just commented on the weather. 6 years earlier, my income and my credit were the only reason a lender would approve the mortgage on our house at all. Vanessa didn't know that. Neither did I, not really, not until 3 weeks later, when a woman named Denise from a title company called my cell phone at 8:40 in the morning and asked if I had a minute to talk about the loan. I didn't even know there was a loan in progress. That was the first hint that something had already started without me. My name is Claire. I married into the Whitfield family 9 years ago, and for most of that time, I understood exactly where I stood in it, which was somewhere just outside the frame. Daniel and I bought our house 6 years ago, a 3-bedroom on Larkspur Court with a kitchen his mother, Patricia, still calls small every time she visits, usually while standing in it. Daniel had just left a salaried job to start his own contracting business. Good work, terrible timing. No 2 years of tax returns to show a lender. I was a labor and delivery nurse with 4 years at the same hospital and a credit score in the 800s. Our loan officer at the time, a guy named Marcus, sat across from us at a laminate table and explained it plainly. Daniel and I would both be on the title, both owners, no question about that. But the mortgage itself, the actual loan, could only qualify on my income. Daniel's name could go on the deed, it could not go on the note. 2 different documents, he said, and most people never learn the difference until it matters. Daniel squeezed my hand under that table and said, "It's still ours either way. Whose name is on the loan doesn't change whose house this is." I believed him. I still believe he meant it. What I didn't expect was that his family would spend 6 years treating those 2 facts, ownership and obligation, like they were the same thing. And worse, like neither one of them was mine. At Thanksgiving the 2nd year, Patricia introduced the house to a neighbor as Daniel's place. At Vanessa's engagement party, someone asked how the Whitfields had managed such a nice property so young, and Patricia just smiled and said, "Hard work runs in the family." Nobody at that table had ever asked what my last 4 years of night shifts had actually bought us, or whose name the bank had needed to see before any of it was possible. The dinner was for Vanessa's engagement. 7 people at Patricia's table, plus me and Daniel. Candles burning, the cinnamon candle Patricia always keeps lit on her sideboard, filling the whole room the way it does every single holiday at that house. Talk turned to the wedding budget, then to money in general, the way it always does with that family, like it's a sport with rules only they know. Vanessa's fiancé mentioned they were looking at venues near Larkspur Court, and Patricia said something about how convenient that was. Everyone clustered near the family house. I said, lightly, that it was our house, mine and Daniel's. Just a fact, said the way you'd correct someone about a birthday. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed, and looked around the table before she said it, like she wanted a witness. "Oh, come on, Claire. Nobody's saying you didn't get lucky. You just married into money. It's fine. We don't hold it against you." Nobody at the table corrected her. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Patricia refilled her wine like she hadn't heard a word. Vanessa's fiancé, to his credit, looked at his plate like he wished he were somewhere else. I laughed too, because what else do you do at a table like that? And I said something about needing more ice. And I walked into that kitchen with the cinnamon candle burning on the counter and stood there for a full minute before I trusted my own face again. I didn't say anything else that night. I'd learned a long time ago that correcting a Whitfield in front of other Whitfields never actually changed anything. It just made the next gathering colder, and there was always a next gathering. What I didn't know yet was how soon married into money would turn out to be exactly backwards, and that the proof would come from someone who had no idea it would land on me. Patricia's boyfriend, Roger, a quiet man who mostly just nodded along at these dinners, caught my eye across the table for half a second, like he'd noticed too and didn't know what to do with it either. I ran the tap longer than I needed to and counted 4 ice cubes into a glass I didn't actually want, just to give my hands something to do besides shake. 3 weeks after that dinner, I was emptying the recycling bin in our kitchen and found a folder Daniel had tossed in with the junk mail, papers from a mortgage broker named Reyes & Cole, addressed only to Daniel Whitfield. Preliminary numbers. A cash-out refinance, still early, broker estimates based on a walkthrough appraisal that had already come back at just over $150,000 in available equity. On a house I hadn't known anyone had walked through. A date on the appraisal order form put it 11 days earlier. A Tuesday I'd worked a double, come home to an empty driveway. No idea a stranger with a clipboard had been through our kitchen that afternoon. Underneath it, a second sheet in Patricia's looping cursive, numbers sketched out like a household budget. $40,000 for Vanessa's wedding, $60,000 for the shop, Vanessa's boutique idea she'd been pitching at every family dinner for a year. The rest listed simply as buffer. I found a string of texts still open on Daniel's laptop. Him and his mother, going back 6 weeks. Patricia had found the broker. She'd told Daniel not to mention it to me yet, until the numbers make sense, so it wouldn't stress me out over nothing. One message just said, "Let me handle Claire." Another from Daniel just said, "Okay." Not yes, not let's talk to her first, just okay, like he was agreeing to let a phone ring instead of picking it up. I read that one word 4 or 5 times, trying to find a version of it that didn't mean what it plainly meant. Daniel hadn't said no to any of it. He also hadn't said yes to anything that mattered. What he'd done was let his mother start a process against a house we both owned, based on a loan that had never once had her name, or Vanessa's, or even his own, anywhere on it. 6 weeks of silence, so an appraisal could happen and a spreadsheet could get built before anyone thought to ask the person that appraisal actually depended on. I stood in that kitchen, with no cinnamon candle anywhere near this house, and somehow I could still smell it. Vanessa had a spreadsheet with her boutique lease penciled in next to a wedding date. I had a folder in the recycling with our equity divided up, like the note behind it belonged to someone else entirely, when the truth was simpler and stranger than that. The equity was ours, together, and every dollar of access to it ran straight through a signature that was only ever mine. I put the papers back exactly where I'd found them and made dinner instead. Chicken and rice, the same thing I always make when I need my hands busy and my mouth shut. I didn't confront anyone that week. I thought instead, and 2 memories kept surfacing over everything else. The Christmas Patricia gave Daniel a framed photo of the house for his birthday, the card reading, "To our homeowner, love, Mom." My name nowhere on it. And I'd been the one to hang it in the hallway because Daniel forgot to. And our anniversary 2 years ago, when Daniel joked at dinner that I was the practical one, and the whole table laughed like that settled what I was for in this family. The credit score with a pulse. Useful, unnamed. Neither memory had felt like an insult at the time, which was exactly what made them worth revisiting now. Both memories said the same thing in different rooms. Ownership and obligation, again, treated as 2 separate facts, and somehow I kept ending up on the side of neither. I didn't say any of this out loud that week. I went to work, I came home, I said good morning to Patricia at a birthday lunch like nothing had changed. And underneath all of it, I kept turning over one plain fact nobody in that family had ever bothered to ask about: whose signature the whole plan actually needed. I brought it up with Daniel 2 nights later, quietly, after the dishes were done. Not a fight. I asked him straight. Why did he let his mother spend 6 weeks planning around our house without telling me? He didn't have a good answer, and to his credit, he didn't pretend to. He said he'd figured he could smooth it over before it went anywhere, that saying no to his mother always turned into a bigger production than just letting her run out of steam on her own, and that some part of him thought if he stayed quiet long enough, he wouldn't have to be the one to disappoint anybody. I told him the money was never actually the part that hurt. Patricia wanting equity was just Patricia being Patricia. What hurt was that he'd let his family make plans about our home and shut me out of the room while they did it, the same way they'd been doing in smaller ways for 6 years, except this time he'd been the one holding the door. He asked what it would take to fix it. I told him the truth. Not an apology to me. An apology wouldn't move a single dollar. What it would take was never letting a decision about our home reach his mother's kitchen table before it had reached ours first. He didn't argue with that. He asked quietly if I was going to tell Patricia what I'd found. I told him that wasn't the part I was focused on yet. What I did next wasn't dramatic. I called Marcus, our original loan officer, who'd moved branches but still remembered our file. I asked him plainly whether a lender could complete a refinance on our house without the signature of the person obligated on the existing note. He said no lender could. A refinance doesn't add a name to an old loan. It replaces the loan entirely, and every current note holder has to sign off before a new one exists. Full stop. No workaround, no matter whose name was also on the title. I asked him to say that last part again, slower, so I'd have it exactly right. And I wrote it down on the back of a grocery receipt because it felt like the kind of sentence I might need later. I didn't tell Patricia I'd found the folder. I let Reyes and Cole keep moving the file through underwriting, toward a wall I already knew was there. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't staying quiet to avoid a fight. I was staying quiet because I wanted them to find that wall themselves, the same way I'd found it, on paper, from someone who wasn't me. It happened on a Sunday, 6 weeks after the engagement dinner at Patricia's house, the whole family there for what she'd billed as a celebration lunch. Vanessa had already signed a letter of intent on a storefront, contingent on the refinance funding by month's end, and had spent most of the meal describing paint colors, like the money was already sitting in the account, Patricia nodding along and refilling glasses like a woman hosting the celebration of something already finished. Partway through, Daniel's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway. I could hear enough from the table. Underwriting, asking for the other party on the existing note, saying the file couldn't move to closing without a notarized signature from Claire Whitfield within the week, or the rate lock would expire. Daniel came back pale and had to say it in front of everyone because there was no version where he didn't. The loan they'd been planning around for 6 weeks had never been his to authorize. It had always needed my signature, and only my signature, because it was my note on a house that was every bit as much his. Vanessa's face did something I'd never seen it do. Patricia set her fork down very slowly, like the sound of it might make things worse than they already were. Nobody said the words out loud, but I watched it land on both of them at the same moment. The woman they'd decided had only married into this family's money was the one whose name the money had been sitting behind the whole time. 6 weeks of spreadsheets and paint colors, and it had all been quietly waiting on a signature nobody had thought to ask for. Daniel sat back down across from me, and for a second neither of us said anything, the whole table waiting to see which one of us would. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't bring up the dinner, or the folder, or the 6 weeks. I looked at Daniel and said I wasn't signing anything until we'd talked, alone, about why his mother had ordered an appraisal on our house without telling me first. Patricia started to say something about how she'd only been trying to help the family, and I told her, evenly, that help usually starts with a phone call, not an appraisal. The rate lock expired 11 days later. Vanessa's letter of intent fell through the same week, once the landlord learned the financing behind it had never actually closed. She found out from her fiancé, not from me. Nobody in that family brought up refinancing again, and nobody ever explained to her why the family house had suddenly stopped being available to talk about at dinner. I called Denise back myself, on my own schedule, and told her the loan wouldn't be moving forward. She sounded relieved, actually, like she'd been waiting weeks for someone with the right name to just say so. Daniel and I are still working through what 6 years of silence cost us. That part isn't finished, and I'm not going to pretend it is. Some nights we talk about it calmly. Some nights we don't talk about it at all. He's stopped saying yes to things by staying quiet, at least, which is its own kind of progress, even if it doesn't feel like much yet. But we agreed on one thing plainly. Any decision touching our home gets made by both of us first, before it ever reaches his mother's kitchen table, not after. I was at Patricia's house last month for a birthday, and the same cinnamon candle was burning on the same sideboard, and for the first time in years, it didn't make my chest go tight walking past it. Patricia asked, almost carefully, how our house was holding up. Our house. 2 words I'd waited 6 years to hear out of her mouth. Vanessa didn't say a word to me the whole afternoon. Roger caught my eye on the way out and told me, quietly, that he thought I'd handled the whole thing better than he would have. It was the first real conversation either of us had ever had. I didn't need Vanessa to say anything. My name had already said everything it needed to say, on the one piece of paper she never once asked to read. If you've ever been the one holding a family together financially, while everyone else got the credit for it, I hope this story felt like it was for you. If it did, subscribe. We post new stories every week. Has anyone in your family ever assumed they had a say in money that was never actually theirs to spend? Tell me in the comments.